Is this some kind of joke? The voice came sharp and mocking from behind the chain-link fence. Corporal Mitch Carson, barely 22 and full of untested confidence, leaned against a Humvee with his buddies, squinting toward the far side of the base. Beyond the fence, under the blistering midday sun, an old man in a red shirt and grey jacket stood beside a rusting M60 Patton tank. The tank's treads were half buried in dust, its paint eaten away by years of wind and sand. The man was bent slightly, his hands steady as he wiped the tank's side with a rag dipped in murky water. Every stroke was deliberate, slow, respectful, like someone cleaning a headstone rather than a forgotten war machine. Private Lacey laughed. Guess the old-timer thinks it's his car wash. Look at him scrubbing that junk like it's gold, Mitch snorted. He's been doing it every damn day this week. Someone should tell him this isn't a museum. The small group of soldiers chuckled, their laughter cutting through the dry air. From the mess hall window, a few more recruits turned to look. It had become a running joke on base, the tank guy. Nobody knew his name. Nobody had asked. The story went around that he was some drifter the locals let wander near the fence. Maybe an ex-mechanic with nothing better to do. A few said he was a janitor who got too attached to old gear, but the truth was quieter, more deliberate, and much, much older than anyone guessed. The old man finished a pass with his rag and stepped back, studying the tank. His hand rested gently on the cold steel, fingers tracing a series of faint engravings, numbers and letters nearly erased by time. He whispered something under his breath. Then, as if aware of being watched, he turned, just slightly, and glanced toward the young soldiers laughing by the fence. For a brief second, Mitch thought he saw something in the man's eyes. Not annoyance, not shame, something steadier. Something that didn't belong to a janitor or a vagrant. Then the moment passed. The old man went back to cleaning. Later that day, Lieutenant Granger, the officer in charge of the motor pool, noticed the same thing during inspection. "What the hell's he doing out there?" he muttered. "Probably crazy," a sergeant replied. "Locals say he just shows up. Doesn't talk to anyone," Granger frowned. "Fine, but if he steps past that fence again, have security escort him out. Can't have civilians wandering near base property." That order would stay on file, unspoken, half forgotten, until the day it would blow up the entire base's sense of pride and history, because that rusting tank wasn't just a relic. It had a name, faintly visible under the sanded paint. Iron dust, and for the man who cleaned it every day, that name wasn't forgotten. It was a promise from a war nobody dared talk about. By the end of that week, everyone on base had heard about the old man and the tank. Recruits began timing their patrol routes just to pass by the fence, trading smirks and jokes as they watched him kneel in the dust, polishing bolts that would never turn again. Someone even nicknamed him the Tank Whisperer. The title spread faster than orders ever did. From the mess hall to the barracks, it became part of daily conversation. "Did you see the Tank Whisperer today?" "Yup, same bucket, same rag." Maybe he's waiting for it to start talking back. At first, it was just harmless talk, the kind that comes from boredom. But as days rolled by, the laughter got sharper. One afternoon, while the sun hung low and the air shimmered with heat, Corporal Mitch Carson and his unit returned from drill. They saw the old man again, same spot, same calm expression. Only this time, he was scraping mud from the tank's treads with a small wire brush. Mitch grinned, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Hey, old-timer," he called. "You missed a spot." His voice carried across the fence. A few of the other soldiers chuckled. The old man looked up, squinting into the light. He didn't answer, just went back to work. Lacey joined in. "You restoring that for the museum, Grandpa? Need some WD-40? Still, no reaction. Just a slow, steady rhythm of scraping metal. The silence made their laughter louder. That night, inside the mess hall, they joked about it again, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Guys out there every morning before the flag's even raised," Mitch said. "Maybe he thinks he's still in boot camp." One of the older NCOs nearby gave him a look. "You kids don't even know what that tank's from." "Sure we do," Lacey replied, half laughing. "The Stone Age." The NCO didn't laugh. "That tank was part of Operation Recoil, classified back in the day. I served with a few who were there. They said the crew never came back. Nobody ever found out why." The table went quiet for a second before Mitch shrugged it off. "Well, guess the janitor's doing his part for history then." The laughter resumed. But the older sergeant's eyes stayed fixed on the window, on the faint outline of that tank under the floodlights outside. The following morning, base security finally approached the old man. "Sir," said Officer Dalton, a young MP, adjusting his sunglasses, "you can't keep doing this. This is restricted property." The old man didn't argue. He stood straight, dusting his hands off on his jacket. "I'm not inside your base," he said simply, his voice low but firm. Dalton frowned. "Still, you're close enough to make people talk. What's your business here?" The man hesitated, then quietly, "Cleaning up what's left." Dalton blinked, confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" The old man nodded toward the tank. "Someone's got to keep her presentable." "She carried good men," Dalton exhaled. "Okay, look, I don't want trouble. Just try not to hang around too long, all right?" The man gave a faint nod and returned to his work. Back inside the security office, Dalton filled out his log entry. Mitch, passing by, saw the report. "Wait, he actually talked to you?" "Yeah," Dalton replied. "Old guy's harmless. Says he's just cleaning it for the men who served." Mitch smirked. "Right, maybe he's one of them ghosts you read about." They both laughed. But when Dalton turned back to his monitor, he noticed something odd. The old man had placed a small black and white photograph on the tank's turret. A faded image of 5 soldiers in dusty fatigues, standing beside the very same tank decades ago. And one of them, barely visible through scratches and creases, looked exactly like him. That night, as the desert wind picked up and sand swept over the empty lot, the base lights flickered once, then steadied. The old man was gone, but his bucket and rag were still there. On the side of the tank, freshly cleaned, a faint engraving could now be read. "For the iron vow." By the 3rd week, the laughter had started to fade. Something about the old man's persistence was unsettling now. He wasn't just cleaning the tank anymore. He was restoring it, piece by piece. Fresh paint had begun to appear in small, careful strokes. Patches of deep olive green, the same color once used during the Desert Shield era. He'd found a way to polish the barrel's old engraving until it gleamed faintly under the sun. No one knew where he got the supplies. No one saw him bring tools or cans of paint. He just arrived before dawn, worked until sunset, and vanished into the desert night. Inside the base's main office, Major Ellison tossed a report across the table. "Who authorized this?" he demanded. Sergeant Briggs picked it up. "Sir, base security logged it last week. Civilian maintenance complaint, nothing more." "Maintenance? He's restoring a decommissioned combat tank on federal property," Ellison barked. "He's not even cleared to be there." Briggs hesitated. "With respect, sir, the man hasn't broken any law. The tank's outside the fence line. Technically not base property. He stays quiet, doesn't bother anyone." "That's not the point," Ellison said. "It's optics. What happens when the press sees some vagrant cleaning a relic while my men are inside running drills?" Briggs stayed silent. He'd seen the man up close once, and there was something about the way he moved. Not random, not the jittery pace of a homeless man. Controlled, measured, the kind of patience you only learn from military discipline. That afternoon, General Ross, the base commander, was briefed on the issue. He skimmed the report without looking up. "The old man again," he muttered. "What's he done now?" "Nothing, sir," Ellison said. "Still cleaning that tank, but it's attracting attention." Ross leaned back in his chair. "Iron dust, right? That's the tank's serial code?" "Yes, sir." The general's eyes narrowed slightly. "Iron dust," he repeated, almost to himself. "Haven't heard that name in years." He looked up. "I'll handle this one personally." The next morning, the general arrived unannounced at the edge of the lot. He stood behind the fence, watching silently as the old man wiped down the tank's turret. The man paused for a second, sensing someone there, but didn't turn. "You know that tank killed good men," Ross said quietly. The old man froze, then slowly turned his head. His eyes met the general's through the fence. For a long, tense moment, neither spoke. Then the old man said, "I know. I was there." Ross's jaw tightened. "You were part of Iron Dust?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a small metal tag. Dented, faded, but unmistakably military. He pressed it against the fence. The general took a step closer, his face draining of color. The tag read, "Captain R.D. Harris, U.S. Armor Division." Ross exhaled. "That's impossible," he whispered. "You're supposed to be dead." By evening, the entire base buzzed with rumors. Some said the general had recognized him from a classified photo. Others claimed the man had once commanded a covert armor platoon that vanished during a cross-border operation in the early 90s. Mitch and Lacey sat in the mess hall, wide-eyed. "So he's not some random janitor," Lacey muttered. Mitch shook his head slowly. "Guess not." He remembered the way the old man had looked at him that first day. Calm, patient, like someone watching a child try to act tough. The memory stung. Later that night, as floodlights flickered across the compound, the general stood alone by the tank. The old man was gone again, but something new had been left behind. A folded piece of paper tucked into the hatch. Ross opened it carefully. Inside were 4 names, all of them men from Operation Iron Dust, an operation the government had officially erased. And at the bottom, a single sentence, written in shaky but deliberate handwriting: "We were never lost. We were left behind." The next 48 hours inside Fort Reddington were unlike anything the base had seen in years. The once mocked story of the old man by the tank had turned into an official military inquiry. General Ross ordered all files referencing Operation Iron Dust to be pulled from the archives. The operation code had long been sealed under non-operational historical, a bureaucratic way of saying buried and forgotten. Now it was being dug back up, piece by classified piece. Ross sat at the head of the table, his face set in stone. Around him were a half-dozen officers: Ellison, Briggs, the base historian, and an intelligence liaison flown in from DC. Captain Raymond D. Harris, the liaison began, flipping through an old dossier, listed KIA during the Recoil Counteroffensive, 1991. His entire crew went missing after their tank was hit behind enemy lines. The mission was red flagged, then erased. No remains recovered. Briggs frowned. "But he's standing outside our base right now." The liaison nodded grimly. "Which means either the report was false, or someone made sure it looked that way." Ross leaned forward. "And the tank?" The historian pulled a faded photo from his folder. "Same serial number, Iron Dust. This tank was part of the 11th Armor, field modified for night ops. If it's here, it must have been recovered secretly." Ellison rubbed his temple. "So you're saying this man's been cleaning his own tank for weeks? The same one that was written off with him inside it?" Nobody answered. The silence was heavy. That evening, Ross returned to the fence line alone. The desert wind had softened, carrying the faint scent of oil and metal. The old man, Captain Harris, was there again, tightening a loose strap on the tank's hull. Ross stepped closer. "You were right. It's your tank." Harris didn't look up. "It was my men's tank." "You should have come forward," Ross said. "You know what this means?" The old man straightened slowly, eyes steady. "It means someone finally remembered." Ross hesitated. "You were declared dead." "I was," Harris replied quietly. "On paper. Easier for them that way." Back inside the intelligence office, the investigation deepened. Each name from the note matched soldiers officially listed as missing from the same unit. Their families had never received full answers, just folded flags and apologies. Lacey, the young private who once laughed the loudest, overheard a fragment of conversation while delivering reports. He stopped cold in the hallway as 2 officers spoke in hushed tones. Apparently, Iron Dust wasn't just a recovery mission, one said. It was retaliation. Covert armor support sent across the border without authorization. When it went bad, command wiped the records. Lacey's stomach turned. The idea that the man he'd mocked might have been part of a buried secret, abandoned by his own country, gnawed at him. The following morning, General Ross ordered Harris brought inside the base for a private debrief. The guards expected resistance, but Harris simply nodded and followed. For the first time, he stepped beyond the fence he'd respected for months. Inside the operations room, everything went still. Soldiers paused mid-conversation, recognizing him. Some stood. Others looked away in guilt. Ross gestured to a chair. "Captain, I want you to tell me exactly what happened out there." Harris sat down slowly. His hands were scarred, his voice calm. "There were 5 of us. Tank 231, Iron Dust. We were deep in the desert when the radio went dead. Orders stopped coming. We waited 3 days, then 4. No extraction, no contact. Eventually, command called it lost." He looked up at Ross. "But we weren't lost. We were left behind to die quietly. No rescue, no acknowledgement, just silence." The room stayed frozen as the words hung in the air. After the briefing, Harris returned to the tank. A small crowd had gathered. Curious soldiers, mechanics, a few officers who once laughed. Nobody spoke as he placed his hand on the steel again. "You see this?" he said softly, more to himself than to them. This isn't just metal, this is memory. We used to call her home when the world outside was burning. For the first time, some of the younger men saw him differently. Not as a drifter, not as a ghost, but as one of their own, carrying the weight of something they could barely imagine. That night, Ross called Washington. "Sir," he said into the secure line, "we've got a situation at Fort Reddington. A man the government buried 30 years ago is standing here alive, and he's got proof." On the other end, there was only silence for a moment. Then a measured reply. "Handle it quietly, General. Some ghosts are better left asleep, but ghosts don't stay buried forever." And before the week was out, the truth about Operation Iron Dust would explode into the open, shaking the entire base and the men who once mocked an old janitor down to their core. The morning sun rose pale over Fort Reddington, washing the desert in dull gold. The old tank, Iron Dust, stood still beside the fence, its steel glinting faintly, the way a scar catches light. But this time, the air felt heavier. Something had shifted. General Ross hadn't slept. The orders from Washington still echoed in his head. Handle it quietly. He knew what that meant. Bury it again. Keep the peace. Forget the man who'd survived hell. But as Ross looked through the window of his office, he saw a group of young soldiers standing near the tank. Not mocking, not laughing, just listening. The old man was talking to them in that low, weathered voice, telling fragments of stories no one had heard before. Word travels fast on a base. By noon, every corridor hummed with the same sentence. The old man wasn't crazy. He was Captain Harris from Operation Iron Dust. Privates whispered it in the mess hall. Mechanics murmured it in the hangars. Even officers found themselves glancing toward the yard, toward the rusted tank and the quiet figure beside it. The story spread beyond the base walls too. A retired sergeant posted on an online veterans forum, "Iron Dust? That can't be real. We were told it never happened." Within hours, old comrades began responding. Men who'd served near the border, men who'd lost friends on missions that had no names, and soon, reporters started calling. That evening, Ross received a coded message. "Cease all discussion. Remove the subject from base property immediately." He crushed the printout in his fist. For years he'd served with discipline, loyalty, obedience, but tonight, his conscience was louder than his orders. Ross walked out to the yard under the fading sky. Harris was there, leaning against the tank, his jacket dusty, his eyes clear. Ross spoke quietly. "They want to erase it again." Harris gave a faint smile. "They've been trying to do that for 30 years. "I can't let them," Ross said. "Not this time." The old man's gaze softened. "Then you're already doing more than most." The next morning, black SUVs rolled through the gate, unmarked tinted windows. A team of defense officials stepped out, led by Colonel Vance, a sharp-eyed man with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing he can silence anyone. He walked straight to Ross. "You were told to contain this," Vance said flatly. "Where is the civilian?" Ross stared at him. "He's not a civilian. He's Captain Raymond D. Harris, U.S. Army, 11th Armor." "That's impossible," Vance said. "Harris is deceased," Ross didn't argue. Instead, he motioned toward the yard. The colonel turned and froze. The sight of Harris, standing beside that tank, stopped him cold. For a moment, even the bureaucratic mask slipped. "My God," he muttered. Harris saluted slowly. "Permission to speak freely, sir." Vance nodded stiffly. Harris stepped closer. "You signed off on our mission. You sent us out there and never called us back." Vance's jaw clenched. "That operation never existed. Then how am I standing here?" Harris asked quietly. No one spoke. Only the wind through the open gate carried the weight of truth between them. Later that night, a young soldier named Lacey uploaded a short video. It wasn't dramatic, just a shaky phone clip of the old man wiping dust off the tank's hull, his hand pausing on the faded letters. "Iron Dust, 231. The caption read, "They told us this was scrap metal. Turns out it's history." Within hours, the video exploded online. Veterans from across the country began posting stories, fragments of the same forgotten war zone. News stations picked it up. A retired colonel even confirmed that Operation Iron Dust was a covert mission, erased after a political fallout. The Pentagon was forced to respond. The truth could no longer be buried. 2 days later, the base held a ceremony. No speeches, no cameras, just soldiers standing in silence before the old tank. Ross read the names from the note Harris had left. his lost crew. One by one, soldiers stepped forward to salute the hull, each leaving a single cartridge case on the ground, a symbol of remembrance. When it was over, Harris stood alone. He reached out and touched the steel once more. "Welcome home, boys," he whispered. Ross approached quietly. "You did it. The truth's out." Harris smiled faintly. "It's not about truth, General. It's about memory. That's all that ever mattered." He started to walk away, the wind carrying dust across his boots. Ross called after him. "Where will you go now?" Harris paused. "Doesn't matter. I was never supposed to make it this far." And with that, the man who had once been a ghost faded into the horizon, leaving behind a tank, a legacy, and a base full of soldiers who would never again mistake humility for weakness. Weeks later, the tank was restored and placed at the front gate. A small plaque beneath it read, "In honor of Captain Raymond D. Harris and the crew who never made it home." Their silence spoke louder than orders. Lacey often stopped there before his shifts. He'd stand quietly, staring at the reflection of sunlight on the armor, remembering the day he'd laughed at an old man with a rag. Now, every time he saluted, he made sure to say the words softly to himself, the ones the old man had once said to the tank. "This isn't metal. This is memory." And somewhere beyond the dunes, a lone figure in a worn grey jacket watched from a distance, smiling as the flag above the base fluttered in the wind, not as a symbol of power, but of remembrance. Years passed. Fort Reddington changed. New buildings rose, barracks were rebuilt, and the sound of helicopters filled the air each dawn. But near the front gate, the iron dust still stood, silent, enduring, and unyielding. The old tank had become more than a relic. It was a place soldiers stopped before deployments, cadets visited during orientation, and families saluted during ceremonies. The plaque at its base had dulled from years of sun and sand, but the story had not been forgotten. Somewhere in those steel plates was something that time couldn't erase, something deeper than paint or rust. One afternoon, a group of maintenance cadets was tasked with cleaning the old monument. Among them was Private Miguel Torres, a 19-year-old recruit, new to the base, impatient and curious. He climbed the side of the tank, running a hand along the rough metal. "What's so special about this thing?" he muttered. "It's just a hunk of iron." An older mechanic nearby looked up from his toolbox. "Watch your mouth, son," he said calmly. "That hunk of iron carried heroes. Captain Harris was one of them." Torres frowned. "The ghost guy? Thought that was just a story." The man shook his head. "So did I, until I met him." Torres kept quiet after that. But as he wiped dust off the side armor, his cloth caught on something, a faint groove beneath the surface paint. He squinted and leaned closer. There were letters, etched deep and steady, like someone had carved them with a knife long ago. "Iron Dust Crew, never forgotten." Beneath it, smaller writing read, "Capt. R.D. Harris, OP Dust 231. Torres froze. "Hey, guys, come here!" The others gathered around, brushing away the grime. Someone whispered, "He really left his mark." A silence fell over them. It wasn't the kind of silence that demanded words. It was the kind that demanded respect. Later that week, an older man in dress uniform arrived at the base. His hair was white now, his stride slower, but his eyes still sharp. General Ross, long retired, came to see the memorial one last time. The soldiers straightened as he approached. Torres, nervous, saluted sharply. "Sir, we found new engravings on the tank. Looks like they've been there for years." Ross smiled faintly. "I know. Harris told me once he left something behind for those who'd listen." He placed a gloved hand on the cold steel. "Every base has ghosts," he said softly. "But this one protects us." He turned to Torres. "You ever hear what the old man said before he left?" Torres shook his head. Ross smiled. He said, "As long as one soldier remembers, none of us are gone." For a moment, even the wind seemed to still. That night, Torres found a sealed envelope tucked under the tank's maintenance logbook. It was yellowed, the paper brittle. The handwriting was neat, shaky, but deliberate. "To whoever finds this, don't clean the rust too much. Leave some of it. It's proof we lasted this long. If you're reading this, that means someone finally cared enough to look closer. This tank carried my brothers through hell. Their names may not be in history books, but they live here. In every bolt, every dent, every shadow that still remembers their laughter. War doesn't end when the guns stop. It ends when we forget. Keep her clean. Keep her standing. Catty Raymond D. Harris Torres read it 3 times before realizing his hands were trembling. He folded the letter carefully and returned it to the metal box, this time sealing it tighter. Months later, the base museum held an event for recruits. A new wing was unveiled, the Silent Heroes exhibit. The centerpiece was the iron dust, restored to full glory, still scarred, but shining under the warm light. On a plaque beside it, engraved in bold steel, dedicated to Captain Raymond D. Harris and the Iron Dust crew, for serving when no one was watching, and remembering when everyone forgot. Families, veterans, and young soldiers filed through the room in silence. Some wiped tears, others simply saluted. Among them was Torres, now a corporal. As he stood there, he noticed something reflected in the tank's sheen. A faint figure of a man in a grey jacket standing near the back wall. When he turned, no one was there, but for a brief second, the scent of machine oil and desert wind filled the room, and he could have sworn he heard a quiet voice, low and familiar. This isn't metal, this is memory. Outside, night fell over Fort Reddington. The stars stretched across the sky like 1,000 medals pinned to the heavens. The iron dust stood at the gate, faintly illuminated by a single floodlight. The camera pans slowly, from the engraved names, across the worn hull, to a single inscription newly added beneath Harris's, "Forgotten by command, remembered by brothers." A breeze moves through the flag overhead, and the fabric catches the moonlight, glowing white and gold. Then faintly a sound, the distant rumble of an old tank engine echoing softly through the desert night. Whether it was memory or spirit, no one could tell, but those who stood guard that night swore they heard it too. A low, steady hum that felt less like a machine, and more like a heartbeat that refused to stop. A single line fades in over the final shot of the base. Heroes don't ask to be remembered. They just hope someone listens long enough to remember why they fought.